So now we started, and thank you for showing up. With all the confusion that has been around this meeting here, with in and out of different rooms, I think it is. I think it is pretty fantastic that we finally wound up in the same room. It's pretty relevant for the discussion, I would say. Anyhow, the thing that we're going to talk about today, which Steve was willing enough and kind enough to agree to, was to try to have a look at the basics of the Tre Principles. And I think it is very relevant because even if I have been involved with a principle for 3 years, and I cannot honestly say that I understand what this is all about.
Oh, really?
It has been 3 years now. So, and I think there are some very general questions that if you would please touch a little bit about those. First of all, what are the principles? Is it's a kind of new toolbox, or is it a new therapy, or what is it? And I think that's one thing. And another thing is, how do I explain the principles if I'm asked by friends? How do I explain it in a way so that they do not run screaming away from me? Finally, how much should I talk about the principles? Because I found when I was initially introduced to the principle, I thought that the whole world should know it about 10 seconds after I learned them. So I think that one of the things that I think is important is how do you convey the message that you want to convey without getting into being a preacher? Because you don't want to be that. So that you see, there are some basic questions. How do I go about being new and enthusiastic and sharing this with the rest of the world?
Okay. They're great questions to really start. And I echo the same as you, Christian. Is I'm almost 7 years of working with understanding of the principles, and the more that I go through each day, the less I know from my psychological experience. So for me, it's been something, it's very different from what I thought I knew as a therapist to where I am now as a human being having an experience that the principles allow us to have. So what I'll ask you to do, Christian, again, is as we're going, is just remind me of the questions. Because I think that was one of the first things when I was kind of resting today. I thought the best way is for me to find out is how long, is everyone heard of the principles? So I know if I have to kind of explain it that way, or is this completely new for people here tonight, or?
Well, I think that everybody has had a touch of it.
Right.
In some way or another, so you can presume that you don't have to start from Adam and Eve.
Okay. So if I'm right, the first question was, what are the principles? And that's something which I find completely exciting, because each person that I speak to, I find that I share them a little bit differently. So really, in the moment what I see, at the beginning when I used to talk about the principles, I was very intellectual with them. My background as a psychotherapist would kind of really put the therapy behind them, because the principles really work beautifully. They underpin, because the principles allow us to have every experience, then they bring our psychology alive. We would have no psychology without mind, thought, and consciousness powering us with the gift of life to understand thought, to be able to express ourselves in the way that we do. So I was very comfortable in that way of doing it, but sometimes when I was explaining it, I was the one left with, should I have done it differently? Could I have done it differently? And I found that the more that I just forgot that and just started hanging out with the person, then I seemed to express it in a way which was right for them to hear it. So tonight, as I share the principles, what I see them now as a power. Really inside every single person from the moment they've came to this earth, there is a power that governs all our experiences. And that's what Sydney Banks was very clear from how psychology and psychiatry was taught, was experienced, was that we'd misuse the understanding of the role of thought. As in, we have to analyze it, understand our conceptual understanding. And he saw that we are part of a power, a system, that as it comes into the experience as our form, it lights us up in such a way through the mind, thought, and consciousness. So mind is an energy. It's the power of life. We see it in ourselves. We see it in other people. We see it in nature. We see how nature knows to take care of itself by the seasons that we have. So it follows its power system in such a way as we do. Now, there's two ways that the principles of mind, thought, and consciousness work. And what I'll do is I'll talk about the practical side of it, i.e. the form at this point, and just see where we go in the conversation. So mind is a power which allows us to have the experience of thought. Now, I was going to do a talk a few weeks ago at a conference, a homeless charity conference. And I knew that there were people there who had experienced homelessness, who might be still street homelessness, up to the CEO of the actual organization. So I knew that I had to be quite practical. And in my moment of how would it best serve me, what popped into my head out of the blue from mind, clear, was to talk about a mobile phone, a cell phone. That everybody has a cell phone that they carry every single place with them. And we know that when we pick up our mobile phone, then we can actually take calls, we can receive calls, and we can make calls, and we can go on the internet, and whatever else your system has been programmed to do. It comes with default settings, it comes with factory settings, where it knows perfectly how to run. That, even though that cell phone knows perfectly how to run, it needs to be charged. It needs a power in order to allow it to work. So we plug it into what we call electricity. I don't know what it is in Danish, but in English it's electricity, which powers up this mobile phone, this system, in order for us to be able to receive calls and make calls. So as a metaphor, just imagine that you are that cell phone, that you have the ability to receive and respond. Now, how we make sense of life through the cell phone is that I might say to you, Christian, have you understood this app? No, what's this app about? Oh, it's absolutely brilliant. It's a great app. So you download the app, and so another piece of information has gone on to your cell phone, has gone on to you. Now, through time, if that app just sits there, nothing happens. It's just there. It's not doing anything until, oh, what's this about? And you press it. So move the app to thought. So we can experience a thought. And a thought is nothing until we put energy behind it. The moment we put energy behind it, it's the retouching of a download, an experience that we've had in life, and then we're reactivating it again through the thinking experience from the gift of thought. So the moment we do that, that app, that thought, let's call it insecurity, is running at the back of our thinking for the rest of our life. And it's kind of beginning to run the show because it has the information. The moment that so our default settings, that app doesn't belong in the default setting. So we know if we download all these apps, all these thoughts, it becomes slow on the mobile phone. So do we. We become a little bit bogged down by our insecurities and those other ways that we express how we feel. But if we take it back to our default setting, everything becomes perfect. Everything becomes how it's designed to run. So we look more towards, how do I fix my app? How do I change my thinking? How do I change my thoughts? Instead of realizing that we are part of a system that knows perfectly how to work. Consciousness allows us to feel the experience that we're having. So if it's insecurity, we will have a feeling which will be personal to us that we've named insecure. Some might call it fear, some might call it doubt, but it's always a thought which is allowing us to have that experience. The thought is powered by our formless intelligence of mind. And then on the screen of the mobile phone, we see what we're thinking. So mind, thought, and consciousness are a system that allows us to make sense of the world of what we're living in. So mind is that we're all part of a intelligence. Every single one of us are powered by the same intelligence. I always like to liken it a little bit when you think how we all came here in the first place, by a sperm and an egg coming together, and it creates this form. There's an intelligence there that, yes, science can point us to, but we can see more by the form that it's real. And there's a wisdom within this power that doesn't know things like insecurity or doubt. And the more that we started to grow and learn from our peers around us, our family around us, our school friends, our neighbors, life, then we've started looking outside for self-gratification, to feel better, to express ourselves more, forgetting our default setting, a natural still point within. But again, the principles never gave up on us. They're still giving us the same information, neutral thought, with everything that we have to have a happy, contented life. And then we begin to use the thinking of an experience. And where we look, consciousness will give us the side effects. It will give us the animation. It will give us the feeling of what we're thinking. And we become hypnotized by the illusionary nature of thought. It seduces us into thinking that because we feel a certain way, it's got to be true. And that's where we've built our psychology on, trying to make sense of what we believe is true. But the innocent thing with thought is that we only remember 8% of an actual experience that happened. So we're telling ourselves a misunderstanding when we look through our old files of experiences into something that we think, I know everything that happened, I was there. But it's the animation of consciousness in the moment, because we're recalling the thinking from the power of mind, and we're seeing thought from that experience. It's lighting us with the experience to understand what we're thinking in that moment, recreating it in the moment, not in the past. We're using the gift of thought. So what would be exciting for me is we're going along, if people would like me to explain that a little bit more, or because it's what I see, there's many ways that I can go on to express it. But
I think it would be wonderful if those of you who are here, because it is as if we start a discussion and we start asking Steve. It creates a sort of dynamic effect, which really is very inspirational. Yeah. So if anybody has a question regarding what we have just talked about, please put it forward to Steve, and that will then lead to other things that probably could be of interest to everybody. So please don't hold back. If you have something, please put it forward.
Yeah, can I ask something?
Please do.
Steve, thank you for your talk so far. My name is Per, and I'm also in Denmark. We are talking about parts of people. And the first thing you notice when you see a person, that's his body. Now, how or where does the body comes in when we are talking about mind, thought, and consciousness?
So, when everything that we are, our psychology and our body, is still the manifestation of mind, thought, and consciousness. Mm-hmm. So we see it in our form as being separate. But without the gift of thought, we wouldn't know that we had a body. So until I use the gift of thought, I don't know that there's anybody outside of me. Until I use that thought to see that there's an energy that I can feel.
You mean use the perceptions?
Absolutely.
Right.
So when I was saying at the beginning was that when we were born, obviously we're born with a body, but we very much live in this made-up reality of our thinking. And we forget of the system as we're designed. So when we're understanding mind, thought, and consciousness, it's all of us. It's the form and the formless.
Okay, good. Now, I am from another school where we used to talk about what's called spirit, mind, and body. Mm-hmm. Now, how would you relate that to mind, thought, and consciousness?
So if you could just tell me what would be your definition of spirit mind, just so I get you clear.
Not spirit, mind. Spirit, one thing, mind, another thing, body, the third thing.
Okay.
Right.
So if you can just explain to me a little bit how you would explain that to people, just so I can hear.
Right. Body is pretty easy. That's what you see from the being. Yeah. You can touch it and feel it. That's pretty easy. Mind in my system is what you think. Most people think in pictures. You can also have sounds and movements and all kinds of perceptions. There's lots of them. And spirit is, to me, a spiritual being, which is not part of the physical universe.
Okay. So we, in principles, we speak about small mind and big mind. Uh-huh. And small mind is our ego, our self-created conceptual understandings of reality.
Yeah, sure.
And big mind is our spiritual intelligence. So I guess we're saying the both things, but with just using slightly different words. Mm-hmm. But the difference is I truly see, because myself, I've always been a spiritual seeker myself. I've always wanted to understand and learn more. But my searching stopped the moment that I heard the principles, because I realized truly that everything that I need to know is within me. And that's so for every single other person. And if you've ever listened to Sydney Banks' sharings, that's one of the first things that he makes clear to people, is that you are what you're looking for. And how we innocently have used the role of thought into believing that we have to do something in order to find a calm state of mind, or an inner silence, or happiness, where what the principles are pointing to, the true nature of the principles points to, you are born with happiness. You are born with a state of mind which is still. So you don't have to search for it. It's the understanding that your thinking is taking you off base. Your thinking is taking you in another direction other than into who you are already.
Yeah, I know. Right.
So I guess we're just saying the same thing and slightly taking a different route to get there, but I guess we're saying the same thing.
Good, thank you. Sorry,
but Steve, I think that one of the things that I've been thinking about is that we have these three components: mind, consciousness, and thought. But the way I see it is that any of them doesn't make sense without the other.
Right.
So there's nothing of them that can work independently of the other. And what I feel, how I understand it a little bit is that the three of them melt together in the human experience.
Yeah.
So in the human experience, you don't talk about the triple effect, because the triple effect is really melted together in the human experience. Because without any of them, there wouldn't be a human experience. So I think that one of the things that has been confusing me a little bit is that although we talk about three separate components in the human experience, they're really all parts of the same thing, namely the experience. And that's another angle to look at it. If you look at spirit, mind, spirit, and body, because mind, spirit, and body in my world are separated just by merely being of a different substance. But if you look at the three principles, they come together they come so beautiful together in each and every one of our human experiences. I don't know whether this is correctly understood, but that has been some of the things that I've been thinking about, is that we might begin to explain the human experience from the basis of the components, but ultimately the human experience is a combination of all of them together, melted into one thing, namely that what we experience in the daily life.
Yeah.
I don't know whether you agree with that or whether Absolutely. It makes sense here.
I have can I continue a little bit?
Yeah.
Good. That's fine. I just wonder, if you look at mind, thought, and consciousness, where does feelings come in? We all have feelings, lots of them. Where do they come in?
Yeah. Do you want to answer that, Steve?
Sure.
Yeah, good.
Well, I think the easy reply to that is thought creates feeling.
Right.
So when we have a feeling, we call that consciousness. And consciousness is what Christian beautifully described there, is the 3-in-1, that when we have the experience, we're having the joy of these three spiritual gifts lighting us up from inside and allowing us to be the gift of thought in the moment. Now, when we look at our feelings, we have a list with exhausted words to describe all the different feelings that we actually can have.
Yeah, right.
Where the principles make it easier and for me much more simpler to work with. Regardless of whether it's an unhappy, it's a joyful, it's an excited, it's a sad feeling, it's still a thought. It just boils down to a thought or a thinking about an experience. So if something happens, let's give a little bit of an example. If something happened, let's say last week that it was an unpleasant experience, and I start asking you to speak about the experience now, then you will use mind, thought, and consciousness to go back to that actual experience. Remember, 8% of it actually happening, but make it 150% as if it's real now, and go into all the details of what's happening. And all of that will be driven by your feelings, because that's what we have innocently got lost in most, is the feeling. Well, we see, I'm really angry right now, or I'm really sad right now, and that's what we go into. I don't want to feel that way. And we have got lost and seduced by our feelings, our sensory overload, and our feelings are guided, or we bring them into our system from our 5 senses. But our 5 senses are powered from mind, thought, and consciousness. So when we start looking at rather than what do we do with the after effect of an experience that happened, when we look at how do we experience in the first place? How do we get to see life in the moment? What is driving me? When we start looking towards our health within, then our health starts answering fresh, new, in the moment. Again, by mind, thought, and consciousness playing in one. And have you ever tried having 2 thoughts at the same time?
Yeah.
It's impossible. It feels like we can, but it's one thought and it's like a conveyor belt. It goes so fast, but we can only have one thought at the one time. But the thoughts that go so fast is thinking. So it's our thinking about the after effect of something that's happened that we're getting seduced by. So if I don't see when I'm talking to someone all those side effects, all those things that's going on, but I see that inside of them, behind all this it's going on, their health speaks in a way that I couldn't. And that's not about understanding feeling. If we ask someone to understand the feelings, then we're slightly beginning to look, I believe, in a different direction from what the principles are saying. All feelings are the side effects that consciousness allows us to experience moment to moment. And we can get lost of them, we can do the illusionary dance in them, but it's still thought, it's allowing us to experience mind, thought, and consciousness.
I love the sentence that is always mentioned in every speech about the 3 principles, and that is, you always feel your thinking in the moment.
Yeah.
And I think that when I look at the functions of feeling that I have in my life, the feelings always point to the quality of my thinking. So whenever I'm feeling something, I know that they are related to the quality of my thinking. So in some way they are pointing backwards, so that I can begin to look a little bit about my thinking and see and knowing that I always can have a new thought any moment here means that I don't have to remain in the same feeling if I don't want to.
And thoughts, the majority of time, are negative fantasies. They're just something, it's just being created from the information that we've keyed in to our system, the apps that we've downloaded, the thoughts that we've downloaded. And when we have, it's not a situation that creates a feeling. It's our thinking about a situation that creates a feeling. And that's based on the misunderstanding of a thought that we experienced. And I say again that we recall 8% of an actual fact that happened. The rest is the misunderstanding that we're telling ourselves. And what happens is that our system has become, from a form perspective, so good at when an app has been downloaded or a feeling has been experienced, that we so easily can watch something on the television or a movie or listen to someone talking, and if they've experienced similar to us, we can associate with that. And the moment that we associate with that, we make it our misunderstanding. You ever watch something on the television, or you've read something, and I think Facebook is a great thing. The amount of things that I've stripped my Facebook back to be as simple as possible, because the amount of things that comes flooding in about what's going wrong in the world and what we need to be doing, we need to be saving this. And it's like I just feel so disorientated by it all. And I know that it's not Facebook it's doing it. I know it's my thinking it's doing it. It's just too much for me. And I emotionally live in I don't like this. I feel very uncomfortable. And I get lost. So I easily could say it's Facebook's fault. Facebook shouldn't be allowed to be on the air and get into it. So that is the gift that the principles give in that moment, to see where we're coming from. We're either coming from the form, and the form is where we get our bubbling up emotions, where we express ourselves from, powered by mind, thought, and consciousness, and the formless. Our thought is where we see the contact sport experience of life, where we come up against things, where we may experience all these kind of beautiful emotions that we've made up through words to try to describe a way that we're actually feeling. What I love is when I've been working with people as a psychotherapist, as a soul coach, as I've studied hypnotherapy, I've studied NLP, everything was to look at everything that we're talking about here, the form, to look at the form of our experience. And as beautiful as that form is, and as beautiful as every single one of us are, we're much more than our form. We're much more than this identity that we look at. I truly believe that for people to come on this call and for people to be waking up to the principles, they see that too. We start seeing where our maybe intuition is nudging us, or our soul nudges is actually giving us. And then things like, I need to understand all these things that happened in my past, just become of less interest. The illusion or the seduction of personal thinking doesn't have the same importance as it once did. When we start seeing the power of who we are, that's when the inside nature of reality is really began to be understood by you. Mm-hmm. No. Not because Sydney Banks said it, or I said it, or George Pransky, or Michael Neal, or Christian, or whoever. One of the things that Sid saw very clear is that no one, well, his words was, no one is more holier, more spiritual, or more higher than anybody else. And the form, we've made it that way. But if we just look at that the form is something that we've borrowed, we're experiencing moment to moment from mind, thought, and consciousness. And we're all doing the best that we can on the level of consciousness that we're having. And consciousness rises like an elevator, like a lift that goes up and down. We never stay in one mindset. We're constantly up and down. Where we try to grab happiness, satisfaction, or all those kind of words and hold it still. But have you ever tried, if a butterfly lands on your hand, have you ever tried grabbing the butterfly? You're going to kill it. If you let the butterfly do what it does, it's more likely to stay with you longer. So your well-being will stay with you longer the less you try and make sense of it. Because it's who you truly are. It's who your default setting is. So the more that we say that, yes, we can understand what mind is, what thought is, and what consciousness is. And there's so many different ways. I found at the beginning, when I used to speak about the principles, I always used to tell people what mind, thought, and consciousness was. And because I truly don't know what they are, that was difficult. So immediately I was putting pressure on myself to try to tell them how life will be. It'll be great. It'll be fantastic if you hear who you truly are. I only know that through a feeling within me. And I know that the more I look towards my true nature, not this nature of my ego identity, but my true nature, then I become more quiet. I become more still. So I realized that I started saying to people, you know, I just heard something in my life that turned my life, and it shared my experience. Because, you know, when you start speaking about maybe an insight you had, or when you start speaking about something that you know it's true for you, people hear that. But they don't hear it with these ears. They hear it from within. And that's what the principles are speaking to soul, heart to heart. Big mind to big mind. So when you're talking with someone, dare I say, forget that you have to explain the principles. Hang out with them and let them feel the experience. When I was speaking at that conference I was speaking to you about, there was I did 2 breakout sessions on health of the helper. And the second group that I had, there was 3 clinical nurses in there who worked with psychiatric people who had schizophrenic and different stuff. So they were saying to me, yeah, but what if you've got someone that's schizophrenic and you have to do this and you have to do that? And I'd say to them, you know, I don't want to disrespect you in any way, shape or form, because I know that there is rules and regulations for that physical safety of those people that you're looking after. And I totally respect that. But when we start giving people things like schizophrenia, mental disorders, when we start seeing the illness and the dysfunction in people, we're not seeing the health inside. So I understand that guy might be given medication from a psychiatrist. I understand there's protocols that you have to. But if you just hang out with that person and you see that behind all that storm in his thinking, there is a still point. And one woman turned around and she said, you know, none of them know me here. And I didn't know if I should have come to this because my husband's my helper. She says, I've been in that clinic, she says, that they run. She says, and the reason why I went there was because, she says, I've had 2 serious nervous breakdowns. She says, and one of the times I was in for 8.5 months. She says, and that's not long to some of the people that I know. She says, but the last time I was put in there is because I thought I was the Virgin Mary. And that was just my breakdown, and I was acting out of that. She says, but you know, as that man's talking, she says, I knew that there was moments, and there was lots of them, that I knew I was okay. Mm-hmm. I knew I was okay. Now, what was really interesting there, I heard that. Not from here. Everybody in that room heard that. People went quiet. They stopped asking questions then, because she spoke from what she knew. That even though she's still on psychiatric medication, all that storm of her thinking that was going on, she felt a stillness inside. And somebody turned and says to her, well, I've been watching you, she says, because you sat with a frown on your face. Your face was really, and I thought, oh, that woman's really concentrating really hard. She says, but you don't have that frown anymore since you've just shared. Now that's someone who's still on medication, someone who's still saying, and her energy, her light shone through. So I feel what the principles gently point us back to, we've forgotten just to hang out with one another and just enjoy the good experiences of life. There's nothing more I love just hanging out with friends, having nowhere special to get to, and just knowing that that is the most beautiful space to be in at that moment, because something great always comes from it.
Yeah.
Something great always comes from when we are not always giving attention to up here. We have everything that we need to have a successful life already programmed. And then we talk ourselves out of it. The principles still allow us to do that. And the principles will guide us. If we just say, I want to feel sad today, our consciousness will say, okay, this is what it's like to feel sad. And thought will show it. Another metaphor is a projector. If you want to project a movie onto a screen, is that we have consciousness which allows us to have the machine which is actually running. We hear the sound, we hear what's going on. It's powered by electricity. Again, it's powered. That projector is nothing without mind. And then on the screen, whatever we're watching is our thinking. We're seeing firsthand and feeling firsthand everything it's going on because of mind, thought, and consciousness. So I'm explaining it what feels right in the moment because that's what's been asked. But as what I'd said at the beginning, I don't know how I'm going to talk about it. But I find myself saying, well, you know what? I found that I used to be someone that I overanalyzed things. I found that I was someone who is quite sensitive. I found that I used to take the weight of the world on my shoulders. And I don't do that anymore. And the moments that I do it, it passes quicker because I catch that I do it. Now, 9 times out of 10, people's like, me too, I do that. Now, immediately, there's wisdom shown that person. Mind, thought, and consciousness is seeing in that moment what they do. And that's where you can start sharing from in that moment. Ah, so you do that too. Yeah. Now, what I find really interesting is the gauge that you have is I know in that moment, do I follow the conversation? Or do I say, oh, that's really fascinating, and just leave it there? Because there's a beautiful word that I love using is I become more curious. Rather me wanting to know what it's like for you, to see if it's the same as me, because it won't be, because we live in separate realities. So no one will truly understand what you think and what you feel. The only person who will truly understand what you think and what you feel is you. Truly. So I've given up having to understand what it's like for people and become more curious how it's showing up in this moment for them. That's when life gets really exciting. Because the moment that you ask them to look at their life now, the power of mind, thought, and consciousness becomes more alive. Have you ever asked, if you, like, just right now, if you think, or just see the experience, are you worried about something that happened 3 weeks ago now? You might be now because I've just asked you to think about it. So you've just seen the role of the principles in action beautifully. And then you can see that it's gone beautifully. And then you can think it's something that it brought you a lot of joy, maybe last week or today. And then that will be gone. We are constantly flowing with the experience of consciousness, allowing us to have the animation of what it's like to be alive. And that's so, even though we all come from the same intelligence, we're using it in our own way. So when you try to see for yourself, how am I using mind, thought, and consciousness? How is it using me? How is it wanting to be expressed through me? If I have this wisdom, if I have this gift and it wants to be, how can I co-create a world that I want to be part of? The moment you start asking yourself that, the ego gets lost. Our intellect gets lost because it can only go on what information we've given it. It can't give us anything new. So the moment you start looking inside yourself for something different, you're getting the new. You're getting it fresh. And that's where it gets really exciting. I remember one of the times going over to, and this is just an example, and then we'll see if there's any more questions, but for me, it describes beautifully what it's like to have the principles and not be attached to any of the good feelings that we have. I was going to go out to do, George and Linda Pransky was starting the first practitioner thing, and I was speaking to him saying, you know, I might come over to do it. This was about 3-4 years ago. I already had done fellowship with Chip Chipman and Elsie Spittle, so I didn't want to do more learning. I didn't want to study. It was more living life, and that's to me what the principles are. This is not an intellectual understanding. We'll never learn the principles intellectually, so you can give that up. That's the best thing about it. There's no exam. Life is the experience. So I had written to Dickon Bettinger and his wife Coisy to say, my business partner Tony was looking at coming with me as well. Do you fancy some guests? And Dickon wrote back in his usual fashion, yes, we would love for you to come and stay with us. I am so excited. I cannot wait. Let me know all the information. So Tony very quickly decided that he wasn't going. And then I thought, no, I'm still going to go. I says, I'll go and I'll hang out with Dickon and Coisy, do things with George and Linda, and then I'll hang out with Dickon and Coisy some more. But then I was asked to go and lead a retreat somewhere, and my heart was really in leading this retreat. So I decided, after going to visit some friends at the weekend, and I would contact Dickon and Coisy to say, I'm not coming. Thank you so much for the offer. Let's do it another time, kind of thing. But as I arrived at this friend, they said, oh, I have a really nice surprise. At 6 o'clock, Dickon and Coisy are going to be Skyping with us. I said, oh, exciting. So the first thing Coisy said was, Steve, before we start talking, I'm dying to know, are you coming to visit with us? And I says, Coisy, I was going to let you know on Monday. I says, but something's come up that I can't do it anymore. She says, oh, okay. And these words that Dickon said will always stay with me because they showed the beauty of the principles. He says, well, you know, Steve, the moments of my living and the thought of you coming to be my home were so wonderful and special. Thank you. And the tears were running down my face then because there was this man truly in the grace of consciousness being birthed in the moment. He saw that it wasn't a waste of time living in that good state of being. There was nothing more to do with it. He wasn't going to get into the sadness that I wasn't going to be there. He saw that those moments of living that, Steve's coming to my house, it's going to be exciting. And we have great time when we're together. We've rich, deep conversations. We have laughter. We go for walks. And that was part of mine was, oh, but I really want to do it. And when he said that, I was free. I had no attachment to, oh gosh, I'm going to have to let them down. I was not in my form. I wasn't thinking. I was just in the experience with Dickon. So when you're sharing with other people, just share what you know. Because when it comes to the principles, whether it's this much or whether it's that much, that doesn't belong. That's the only form that we have competition. I know more. Just share what you know from what you are learning. Because 9 times out of 10, actually I'm going to say 10 times out of 10, because I know that people hear something. When you're truly coming from that experience, just like what Dickon had brought in that moment, I just saw. And until your people are ready to see, that's why not getting into explaining them is a really exciting thing. Because those who know my story, when Tony started telling me about the principles, I was so full, I wasn't interested. So when I heard him speak about the principles, I heard yada, yada, yada. There he goes again. It's this stupid principles. So was that really in a place for me to learn who I truly am? No, because I just listened to this story. Oh, if he talks about these things again, if he tells me how my life will be great, and in the end I had to say, stop talking about them. That moment I realized I didn't like the Steve that said that. And in that moment I thought, okay, so if I don't like Steve and I'm doing that, I know where I'm coming from. And perhaps, maybe just perhaps, there is some truth in what Tony's sharing. I didn't like it because my yada, yada, yada was so comfortable, but I didn't like the feeling that I was having in my overthinking. So I said, okay, let's just see. I will listen to some people. But I brought my intellect. I brought everything I knew about psychiatry and psychology. No, psychology says this. No, not right. No, they've got it wrong. Again, I didn't like the feeling. So I was seeing firsthand what my thinking was manifesting. A good feeling when I thought, maybe there's something in this, and a not good feeling when I was overanalyzing what I was hearing. So when you're sharing with people, no matter who it is, just share from what you know. That is the best advice to give. Because you'll find in that moment that you will be given from this energy, this power, the spiritual formless energy, you will be given the right metaphors or understandings to give to people in that moment. And whether it's explaining that consciousness is something that it doesn't stay still, and to our form it looks like consciousness has floor 10 and then there's a roof on it and we can't go any higher than that. To our formless nature, our consciousness is limitless. There is no box that we live in. We are totally limitless in our spiritual nature. And Sid says that pure consciousness is our soul. Our pure energy is soul. And not the soul that we call it in the form. I see soul as being S-O-U-L, searching out universal love.
Okay.
So we're all doing it. Every single one of us is wanting to have a happier, contented life. And innocently, we've got lost in the gift of the three principles and using them against ourselves when we don't feel good. Christian pointed to it earlier on, and I'll point to it here again, that the moment that we're feeling uncomfortable about something, like I expressed there when I would hear Tony speak about the principles, I knew that was me. Did I listen? No, because my ego wanted its attention then. It wanted to show what it already knew. What do you mean? I've done all these years training. How can you say that one mental health is one thought away? What kind of craziness is this now? But I promise you, time and time again, I have seen life change just like that in the moment. And that's what becomes totally, totally beautiful. When we see the animation of mind, thought, and consciousness just showing itself. Consciousness brings us the feeling, and thought allows us to see it. How beautiful is that? That we have this system that we're designed as perfect. We're not damaged, we're not broken. To the form, it looks like we are. But that is the made-up part of our identity. When we see where our true identity comes from, and we see that we're not our concepts, we're not our beliefs, we're not our past, we're not our future. We're the wisdom, we're the truth, we're the power to have form. When you start looking at your life from there, and you start talking from there, all bets are off how you will share what the principles are. So maybe even, I guess if you do a talk, then if you're talking about the nature of reality, but I found the more that I'm sharing, unless I'm asked to speak about the three principles, the less I speak about them. And I just share what comes to me in that moment. And I might use the word consciousness as in my feeling. I don't know. But that's the exciting thing, that if we take away how we have to describe something, we can be free with it in the moment.
Mm. Yeah, thank you very much. I think I got to understand what you're talking about. To me, it all boils down to being.
Yeah.
Anybody else has a question to Steve? Frankly, Steve, I think this is the place to stop because there's such a good feeling at the moment. And I don't think we should disturb it.
I love your thinking. How
do you feel about that?
I feel wonderful about that. And can I just say that that feeling is just not because of what I'm saying. This is all of us creating this feeling now.
Yeah.
And this is what I've been pointing to through this, and Christian's been pointing to, that when you start hanging out in that, and that's all I knew when I came on this call that I had to give. How I would give it and share it, I did not know. In fact, the funny thing was, I thought, if I sit down and maybe, let's see if wisdom wants to give me some words, and nothing came. But you know, the thought, it did come, and I had to laugh when I couldn't get online or get Christian at the beginning. The very first talk that I did with Christian, when I came online, he says, "Oh, thank goodness you're here. I was worried you wouldn't get here." And then tonight I couldn't, so I started laughing. Before, I would have become so, oh my God, I can't get online and everybody's going to be waiting and I'm going to let Christian down. I can have that thought and not believe it. Just because I think it, I don't have to become it.
No.
So in that place, it allowed me to be, well, okay, there's other ways that I can reach out, and we got there. And that feeling, through not getting to my thinking, is what we naturally are. So when you're sharing, and this is always what I love pointing to, and I love, and thank you, Christian, for seeing it, because I love that you see that, my friend, also. And this what gives me the delight of any work that we can do in Denmark, because you see the true nature of the principles as not being an intellectual understanding, but as something that we truly are. And that when we say that that power is who we truly are, that's how this life will change for every single person around the world. Sid saw that this would be the hope for all humanity. And when each person sees that they are the feeling of goodness in the moment, and that's it. Whatever is birthed from that goodness, oh my goodness, it's undescribable. And if you just hang out with people and just see that goodness inside of them, see that love inside of them, you will not be able to help coming from that love and goodness yourself. I promise you, if you start doing that. And that's how we will start one by one, not getting lost in all our made up identities and seeing everyone for who they truly are. Just like I didn't see that woman, I honored that she was had a diagnosis of schizophrenic. In fact, she had 5 diagnoses that I didn't even know. I thought, oh my goodness, they're making up more diagnoses. I saw that that woman was sat there with health, and it was showing itself beautifully for her in the moment. So gift yourself that same health, untouched, undiluted by any conceptual understanding, any belief system, and let it guide you, show you the beautiful soul making its way into the form moment to moment. So thank you.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank
You
you.
will. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.